Okay, should we make a start?
Yeah, I think so, Gary. Absolutely. I'm sure a few more will join as we begin.
So good morning, everyone. I'm Gary Byrne from Nviron, and I'd like to thank you for joining us today for our panel discussion with Red Kite Learning Trust. Can I introduce our panelists and speakers? Firstly, from Red Kite Learning Trust, Director of Operations, David Noble, Executive IT Team Leader, Adam Daly, and Trust IT Manager, David Burns. And from Dell Technologies, Education Regional Sales Director, Brian Horsburgh, and finally my colleagues Andy Carty, Nviron's Head of Public Sector Sales, and Terry Guy, Nviron's Public Sector Account Director, who will be part of the panel discussion. You've probably already heard that we're very much aware of how valuable time is at the moment, and we plan to be around or under an hour, including an opportunity for questions, which you can pose in the chat box. And if we've got time at the end, we'll be happy to go through those. So without further ado, let me pass you over to Andy to get us going. Thank you, Andy.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the event today. The Nviron ethos is to establish, build and maintain trust with colleagues, customers and suppliers. How do we do this? We only make promises we know we can keep along with our colleagues and our suppliers. We solve problems for our customers, no matter how small, to demonstrate our ability to deliver. Without further ado, I will hand over to my colleague Terry Guy for the panel discussion, where you can all find out more. Over to you, Terry.
Thanks very much, Andy. Right, we'll probably start with the question today, if that's all right. Would you give us an overview of the trust? How does it compare to other trusts or LEAs in terms of pupil premiums, technology access, and overall teaching and learning challenges and outcomes?
Okay, thanks, Terry. So Red Kite Learning Trust, as an overview, was formed in 2015, grew out of Harrogate Grammar School, who joined forces with two other primary schools in Harrogate in 2015, as I said. By 2017, it had grown to 6 schools and included Crawshaw Academy in Pudsey and Leeds, plus 2 other primary schools in Harrogate. And then it more than doubled in size in 2018, when another 7 schools joined, so we are currently 13 schools. That puts us in the top 60 multi-academy trusts in England. There's 1,200 multi-academy trusts now across all of England, and that's based on pupil numbers. We have just over 8,000 pupils across our 13 schools between Harrogate and Leeds, and we have 1,300 staff in total. Annual turnover is in excess of £50 million. In terms of revenues, funding coming into the trust and income from other sources. And of the 13 schools, we've got 3 secondary schools, 1 all-through school, which is a free school academy that was opened in 2015 and is still growing and developing, and 9 primary schools. In terms of educational outcomes, the question you asked there, Terry, we've got 3 outstanding schools within that 13. 1 requires improvement school and the rest are all good. So a really good, strong set of schools in terms of their outcomes for young people and children. As I said, we're Harrogate and Leeds based. Generally, our rule is we don't want to be more than 45 minutes travel time between schools to be efficient. And really, in terms of the nature and profile of our schools, I'd say we are truly comprehensive. We have a very strong outcomes in terms of a number of our schools, but a number of our schools, particularly in East Leeds, are very challenging. So you take free school meals as a percentage of pupils in the schools, we range from 5% of children in some of our Harrogate schools up to 76% in some of our East Leeds schools. So that's truly comprehensive, to use that term again, in terms of the profile and demographic of the schools. And that feeds into your other question around access to technology, because again, we've got the whole gambit, really, the whole range from Harrogate Grammar School that's got a very well established, been probably almost 10 years, a one-to-one scheme with Apple iPads funded by parental contributions. And there's over 2,500 iPads in that school that are managed and supported and give, and particularly this year with the pandemic, fantastic access to online resources and interactive teaching from staff. You take that to the other end, so particularly in some of our East Leeds schools where children don't even have access to the internet at home, do not have access to a device at home. So, you know, that's a real challenge, but it also makes us very strong as an organisation in terms of our ability to meet that whole range of needs of children and young people in terms of delivering outstanding teaching and learning for them. So that just gives you an overview of Red Kite. Terry, I think you're on mute.
Thank you very much for that. Apologies, everybody. The next question is for Adam. Does the trust have any unique IT challenges compared to other trusts or schools? How is changing technology affecting the way the trust operates, both organisationally and in the classroom?
I think I'd say that all trusts have unique challenges. You know, the issues that we face are similar to different schools mapped across the country. I think it's obviously the combination of those particular challenges that make each trust unique. So Dave's already alluded to the fact 13 schools in 3 clusters effectively. So we operate across 2 local authorities, so North Yorkshire and Leeds. And one of the challenges is about operating in very different contexts. So the expectation from parents and from the community in East Leeds compared to Harrogate is very different, and the challenge to those schools is very different. One of the things that's Red Kite has grown out of a teaching alliance, and it was schools deciding through a spirit of collaboration and wanting to improve outcomes for young people that they would work together, and the trust has grown from that. So what we have is a collection of schools that were good or above in the vast majority of cases, that had strong leaders that had gone down in a particular direction with their curriculum, their IT. So what we're not doing is picking up schools where we can say, this is the way you do it. So the trust is very much based around, you know, there is a freedom to be responsive to the local community without a freedom to fail, if you like. And it is very much about equality. So Dave's already alluded to the fact that if you take Harrogate and you compare Harrogate with East Leeds, you are talking about a completely and utterly different context. And so that's a challenge for us in terms of the vision of the IT strategy, which is about equal opportunity for all our students wherever they are and having access to the very best technologies. That is probably the single biggest thing, and trying to pull together a disparate group whilst they are close 45 minutes, you know, as a standard kind of rule in terms of schools joining. It still means that there is a geographical distance, and obviously when you multiply that by 2 different authorities with different sets of regulations in certain circumstances, it is a challenge. I think with regards just briefly to operation, you know, one of the things that as a consequence about this broader change, and some of this is tied in with our management information system because we've moved that to a cloud-based solution across the trust. So all our primary schools are now cloud-based, and 2 of our secondary schools, and the remaining 2 will be cloud-based by the end of the academic year. What that's done for us really is allowed us to kind of restructure the IT support service. So in terms of increased centralized control and then redefinition of local roles. So we've got new roles that have developed. For example, we now have one of our IT technicians who is completely engaged with training and development. So you've suddenly got a team of people led by Dave with this group of knowledge in one place that can manage the system centrally to reduce the amount of issues at a school level, whilst also allowing us to redefine a little bit more the roles in the schools, because there is such a pace of change, particularly at the moment in the situation we are with COVID. I think the single biggest change for us has been a single trust 365, Microsoft 365 tenancy, and we have a blueprint across the trust for developing Teams usage. So that consistency of experience, and also being able to train people and work collaboratively to develop that as quickly as all schools have had to do over the last 6 to 8 months. So that's been a real advantage of us, you know, being tied together from an infrastructure point of view. One of the key barriers we had was 13 schools all on separate 365 tenancies. And if you've ever experienced trying to log into 2, 3, 4 different tenancies, it's not always that easy. But that has been one of the major advantages and really pushed things forwards across the schools.
I mean, you might have alluded to this answer already, but could you give us an overview of the IT, what it looked like before the update? I know you alluded to like no centralized Office 365 Teams environment, or but what did the IT look like from an individual skill point of view? Because I know this is something that was quite close to your heart, wasn't it? It's actually to make these changes.
Yeah, it was. So we range, and Dave's alluded to this in his introduction, we range from a school of 2,000 with a one-to-one iPad solution, which had Dave Burns, now our IT manager, overseeing that shift. So extremely highly competent IT understanding, a drive from a school to take on something. And this was implemented 9 years ago, 8, 9 years ago. Dave will correct me on that one. There's one level, and take it to my own personal experience at Crawshaw, where 20 minutes for students to log on. So they go into a network room, and it could be 20 minutes for students to be able to actually get to a point where they can work. So key problem for us there. Similarly, you know, 13 separate networks, 13 servers and backup servers and storage. You know, we were at a point where our Dave will correct me on the technical term, but the big thing that saves all our stuff fell over, and we had a couple of weeks when we were hand to mouth trying to patch together provision for the students. So a key element really. So, and Crawshaw is not atypical. I think Crawshaw was at a particular end of the spectrum. But real issues. So if you look at member of staff's not confident to go into an IT room, because, you know, you think about the behaviour issues that come with children waiting for 20 minutes to be able to log in, and then not entirely sure that the connections are going to work and be reliable. So very quickly, staff lose faith in that. You know, I've mentioned obviously the 13 separate Microsoft tenancies and the issues of that. So, I mean, critically, really, before the upgrade, the quality of experience was incredibly variable, and a key issue really for us in terms of business continuity, from a storage point of view, from a data protection point of view, GDPR, you know, making sure that the data is stored safely and compliantly. So a whole range of issues. Primary schools with one-to-ones and Wi-Fi, primary schools with no Wi-Fi. So it was kind of, we needed to do something at this point in the trust's growth so that we had something, so should other schools join in the future, this is part of the offer and this is what we can do, you know, to join the team, if you like.
Interesting. David, I suppose it's probably outside of running order this one a little bit, but would you like to add anything from a technical point of view, I guess, as to what it was like to support an environment in that sort of state when you had 13 separate schools and 13 separate support personnel? Well, I don't know how many personnel you had.
Well, it was interesting, let's put it that way. So, I mean, that was one of the things that we wanted to do with this, really. It was because previously each of the schools was either had IT staff that were just there to look after that school, or a couple of them had sort of one member of staff who would bounce between schools, or we use third-party companies to support those schools. So that could range from, you know, somebody being a technician being on site for, you know, two days a week, to somebody coming in for half a day every 2 weeks. So the quality of the support that the schools were getting was highly varied, and yeah, that was in part causing issues because things were piling up and not getting fixed, or it was very much a case of, you know, just people just going in and, you know, just fixing the things that were broken without necessarily having time or the opportunity to do any development work, or actually just invest in improvements to the infrastructure, to the computer systems, to, you know, identifying what some of the underlying causes of issues were, and also as well, you know, to provide opportunities for staff to, you know, learn how to do things like differently, which might help them in terms of either from you know, teaching and learning, or just from the operational point of view. You know, there's one of the things that, as Adam said, we want to really do with this is just provide a basically almost a continuity of experience for everybody across the trust, no matter which school they were in. We want to give them the same opportunities to access the same systems, to have access to the same, you know, level of support. So, you know, just from a support personnel point of view, you know, we only had about 13 people employed across the trust at that time, and of those 13 people, there was 5 of them employed just at one school, and then 3 at another school, and then the others were just sort of scattered around and just helping out where they could. Obviously, when Adam's SAN broke, as he mentioned, then, you know, the trust was available then, and we'd pull on resources at those other schools to be able to help us to get Adam's school back up and working. But then that caused, you know, that meant that those schools didn't have those people available. So we, you know, as part of this exercise, it was a case of looking to see what sort of support did we want to provide to the schools, and how could we best staff that.
Okay.
Terry, could I just add to that point?
Yeah.
Something I was going to mention, but obviously we work across 2 authorities, and Leeds, for anybody that knows Leeds, went through the Building Schools for the Future, and as part of that, the IT element was separated out from the building side. So you had a situation where there was considerable investment in IT, but with no refresh built in. So some schools managed that well and continued to develop or thought about, and some schools didn't do as well with that. And so we were at a point where everything was end of life, and we will have been similar to many schools in Leeds. If you then put that with sort of reduction in sort of public funding to education over the last few years, you know, we were in a situation where we needed to do something, and the cost of this project was similar to what we were going to have to pay individually on each of these schools. You know, and that was a key part of the decision. You know, whilst the numbers do get quite large, we'd have been spending that amount of money just make do and mend without any of the additionality that comes from the structural solution that we have now.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just watching the chat here. A couple of questions have come in, and one was around staffing. There's one around the investment, but I'll come on to that later to Paul, who's asked the question. But Brian's asked around the size of the IT team in terms of personnel. So Dave Burns referenced there, we had 13 IT staff prior to this change. We currently have 19, so we've gone up by 6. And I'll talk about that in one of the later questions, but we've got 6 now in the central team, so Dave plus 5. There's 4 infrastructure technicians and service engineers there, and a trainer that we brought in because of the change we're bringing about with new procedures. We've got 2 at Crawshaw at Adams School, 5 in East Leeds, covering 7 schools, and 6 in Harrogate. 2 of the Harrogate schools aren't on the network yet. We're going through a process this year of migrating schools onto the single network. We will need probably more support there. Harrogate's quite high because of the iPad scheme. We reckon there's probably 1.5 to 2 technicians at Harrogate Grammar Schools solely supporting iPads with students and staff. So that is an investment. But we've had to up it to support the migration this year into next. and that was part of the financial proposal put to the board back in March this year, to make that investment this year and next to make sure we manage the migration of schools onto the network. What that will look like later on, yes, there's an expectation it's going to be lower than 19, but there is an aspiration to bring that down to more around the 16 level. But until we got our hands on the network, until we could see what was required and the support we were getting from Nviron, we didn't want to commit to that. And I was lucky in that the board didn't push me on that, and also recognizing that we were coming from a very low base. To Adam's point before, we'd underinvested, not we as Red Kite Learning Trust, but historically the schools and authorities had underinvested in the infrastructure, had underinvested in the service across some of those schools. And so we were playing catch up really in a way, and we were having to stabilize quite a number of those schools in terms of the situation they were in. So it required overinvestment probably in these 2 years as we're going through this transformation program. So hopefully that answers your question, Brian.
If I can just pick up on that, actually, just from an operational point of view. So one of the things that we were very keen to do was again, not necessarily do things in exactly the same way as before, so have just technicians who sat looking after individual schools. We did want to just do a restructure as well, just to again provide the best sort of support to the schools within the areas that Adam has mentioned. So we took the opportunity to look at having a centralized trust team who would do things like work more on the infrastructure side of things and the more technical aspects, and then have rather than people being assigned to individual schools at within their local area, like the East Leeds side of things or Harrogate, we would look at having those people being responsible for supporting all the schools in that area. So you've got a team of people there, so all the knowledge isn't necessarily held within one individual who, if they were off ill or had holiday and there was a problem occurred at that school, then then people would be scrambling around to try and work out what was going on. That's something that we've been quite keen to do, really, just to provide I guess a better support for people rather than just doing things in the same way that's been done previously.
Thank you.
Terry, one of the other questions Brian asked was hours of operation. Very quickly, okay. What I wanted to do with this in terms of a vision was move schools away from, well, I can only work on IT when I'm in school. Yeah, and probably if there's a lot of other education colleagues on the meeting today, you'll recognise that. Go back 5 years or more, and it was, well, I can only work if I'm in school because that's where all my resources are on. What I wanted to get away from with this solution was a true 24/7 operation to give staff that flexibility to work when they could work, to meet the changing needs of the way people operate and work and their needs, and to be attractive to staff who want to join Red Kite Learning Trust, because it makes it much more flexible and lets people manage their time. So in terms of hours of operation, Brian, it's 24/7, okay? That brings added pressures for Mr. Burns around how we support a network that is 24/7 and why we've brought into support from Nviron, but in the 21st century, surely that's how we should be working and operating.
Yeah, but just from a staffing point of view, at the moment, we've kept the staffing hours to be similar to as they were previously. So within each local authority, the general hours for it's sort of 8:30 till 4:30 or 8 till 4, and we've kept that as a standard for the moment. But I imagine that would evolve over time as we do start to see the need for people to be working slightly further out of hours, and we're just looking to sort of build that flexibility into, again, the way we support the schools, and get schools used to not necessarily needing to have somebody on site, because if everything's on the same system, we can support people remotely. That makes the support technicians more efficient. It also means that the schools can get things fixed quicker rather than necessarily having to wait for everybody to come back. And for some schools, that's a big change to the way they're used to things working. For other schools, it's something that they're that they're already familiar with. So it's I guess it's a bit of a learning curve for everybody, really, and just sort of seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work, and then I think we'll probably be taking stock in about sort of 6-8 months, and then again after that, and just seeing, right, this is what we put in place, this is what's working well, that we can keep, this is what isn't, and then we can evolve that and just make changes. And it's going to be a continuing process, really, just to provide the best support we can for each of the schools to meet their needs.
Yeah, that's great, thank you. I think some of the questions are coming in now. We've got a session at the end where we can cover the question and answer sessions. So I'll get time for them all, but I think some of the answers may also come up in the few set questions we've got left anyway. So another one for you, David. Obviously, the new solution is founded on a new data center and upgraded network with hybrid cloud elements from Microsoft 365. Would you explain the strategic and operational benefits of this arrangement?
Okay, so one of the things that we were looking to do really was just make sure that we had a good standard to provide a good standard for all the schools at the trust, irrespective really of what some of their existing infrastructure was. So I guess really this is part of a big project that we've got in terms of just upgrading and working on everything and getting schools as brought into the current century as possible. But we'd looked at a couple of different options really, just around either whether to have everything stored in the data center, whether to go to a fully cloud-based environment, or and as we ended up going down the sort of hybrid cloud route. The main reason for this was just around surety of costs. There were a few other ones as well, which I'll touch on in a minute, but by purchasing and using hardware in a data center, we had fixed costs with that, whereas with an all cloud-based solution, particularly with schools that we didn't necessarily have a lot of visibility over what systems they had and how they were used, the costs could vary and can vary quite dramatically. And initially, we just want to have some sort of surety as to how much money we were spending and what we were getting from that. As I say, a lot of the systems and stuff that were in the schools, some of which we'd not really used for a lot previously, schools use cashless catering a lot as one example, which can be quite server heavy and can make use up a lot of resources at times. And we just don't really have much of the data at the moment, certainly to see how that's used upon each individual school. As we've mentioned previously, we've across the trust we've got schools which have used IT rather differently, and some schools have hardly used it at all. Some schools are very heavy investors, and we needed to actually get everybody onto a single platform first before we then start to look further as to see what we could do in the future. But using the hybrid cloud thing, so having servers in the data center, it also meant that we could put physical servers on site as well. And I know that's a question somebody asked, but the advantage with having physical servers on site is that should somebody come along outside with a digger and rip up your internet connection, you've still got the access to certain core features and core functionality within the school. Things like access to cashless catering, as I mentioned, or SIMs for those schools that are still using SIMs. So the schools can still continue on at a base level until we can get the connectivity back out to the WAN restored. And that was a concern from some of the head teachers. But one of the advantages with the hybrid cloud is that we can start using elements within things like Microsoft 365, take elements of that, which I'd imagine a lot of schools and a lot of organizations are currently using, things like the email and file storage being good examples, and incorporate them into how we planned out and how we spec'd out the servers that we needed. By doing this, we could then reduce the amount of hardware we needed, thus reduce the cost that we were going to be spending on that, and so getting the best of both worlds really. By pushing people more to using the Microsoft 365 side of things, so using OneDrive for personal storage, using Teams, that also enhances things like collaboration benefits as well, and as Dave said, lets people work from home more readily, which particularly in this current environment is something that's really useful. If a class of students has all their resources stored within Teams, and the teachers accessing the work through Teams, if that class does get sent home, providing they've got equipment at home they can use to access it, then it means that learning can continue in a fashion, whilst they're not necessarily physically in school. We're also being pretty mindful as well about the potential for the trust to expand. So any system that we put into place would need to be scalable. That's both from a hardware and a cost point of view. Now we ended up going down the VxRail route with Nviron, and from my point of view, VxRail being a hyper-converged solution, that was very important because you had all the scalability built into it. So if Mr. Noble did come along and say, right, well, we're bringing on another 6 secondary schools in the next 2 months, I'd at least have a bit of an idea about how much equipment I need to buy and the sorts of costs associated with that, which we can then factor into our planning for the costs to bring those schools on board, which again helps with all the budget setting, budget planning, and all that sort of thing.
Excellent, thank you. Very comprehensive answer. So Dave, services were a key part of the project. Can you tell us the value Nviron consultation and support brought? And what appealed to you about the proposition from Nviron and Dell EMC particularly?
Okay, so again, I hope by now people are getting the flavour and context of the challenge we were facing back in 2018 into 2019. And really Adam leading this from a teaching and learning point of view, David from a technology point of view, myself from a commercial business point of view for the organisation, had a real conundrum really. We knew what we wanted to do, we knew where we wanted to get to, but getting the board behind us, getting our exec behind us, but having confidence in a plan that what we were going to deliver could be supported, implemented and sustained was a real challenge. And I think anyone taking an organisation, a very complex organisation, through such a large, massive transformation programme, but we had limited resources and expertise in-house. So a major factor of what we needed to do was make sure that we were working with partners who could support us and advise us around the technical solution and support us with the implementation and then the ongoing service management. So, I very quickly flagged up early on that we couldn't do this on our own. Dave, brilliant in what he does in terms of the technical support, but as well as doing business as usual and providing the service across a growing and forming multi-academy trust with all the challenges that had in terms of stabilisation of poorly invested networks and delivering that change, just couldn't take this on as well. We needed that expertise. So, that was really important. So what we did is we talked to a number of other educational institutions, some universities, we talked to other multi-academy trusts. An interesting one of them, quite a large multi-academy trust in the north with around 32 schools, mostly secondary schools, talked about a process they were going through which they call stabilise, standardise and centralise. And it kind of struck me and Adam when we were talking to them that, crikey, they've spent 5 years going through those 3 steps, and we're proposing to do all of that in one go, which was quite sobering at that time, as that was around kind of spring 2019, summer 2019. But it really helped us through our discussions with various providers. We talked to other people, not just Dell and Nviron. We went to BET in January 2018, January 2019, and again this year. But through those engagements and those discussions and working out what's the right technology for us to support us to deliver outstanding teaching and learning. And that really helped us focus on the type and getting the right balance of local versus centralized capacity and support and systems. And through those conversations, we ended up in 2019 working very closely then with Dell, and they introduced us to the guys from Nviron. And so we really needed that strong support to help us work out the solution, to understand the costs, to put a proposal together, and then to procure that solution. Okay, and it was really, that's what we needed, and we were very fortunate to get strong partnership working from Dell and particularly Nviron to help us through that and understand where we were going with this. So, and obviously there's a cost involved in that, but we'll come on to that in a later question, Terry.
Excellent, thank you. So back to you, Adam. Transformative information technology delivers improvements across the entire spectrum of service. Have significant wins already emerged because of the new solution, for example, in performance, collaboration, or in user experience? Are you on mute there, Adam? Sorry. You're on mute, Adam.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, definitely. I mean, the single biggest change, I think, is the single tenancy. and the ability to collaborate, whether that is at a teaching and leadership level or increasingly at a student level, and being able to manage that safely, centrally. Dave Noble, I'm surprised he hasn't said it yet, and he isn't going to thank me for saying this, uses the analogy of train tracks and trains. And I think we're at a stage where all of the train tracks are being put in place, and we're really starting to see the benefits of that now in terms of how we operate. And the big push at the trust level is, okay, we've made this investment, we've got this connectivity, and how does that impact on what our curriculum looks like at a primary, at a secondary, and how do we develop and share those resources? We've spent quite a lot of time developing our teams and our SharePoint sort of hub portals for each of those in a similar line, so that there's a consistent feel, and there's pockets of innovation happening across the schools, which are bottom up as much as they are top down, which for somebody who's kind of driven IT for a long while, it's fantastic to see within my school, within different schools. We have an IT strategy group, and those people are sharing ideas and learning things. So that's a massive advantage. I mean, then the specific things. You know, I went to one of our schools to do some talk about 365 and team strategy, and went onto the head's computer and logged in. And logged in as myself, and all of my files and everything I needed was sat there on his desktop. And part of that is because the desktop is OneDrive, so anything you save to your desktop is automatically on your OneDrive. So if you're working at home or you're working wherever, it's there for you. If I go back to where we are as a school, my staff. So on the basis that we have all this, we've also this infrastructure. We've also invested in the number of PCs as a first start, and we use a room. We call it our Strive room. There are 65 computers in there, and we use it for short-term cover, and we use a piece of artificial intelligence software called Century. So in the past, we had issues with quality and numbers of supply teachers, cost of those supply teachers, what the students were experiencing, whereas now teachers can set, or initially they could set, you know, Century work, which follows the students and identifies individual areas of misunderstanding and tests and retests them on that. So if the teacher was off for a lesson or off for a day, the default position would be they would go in there, and we've developed a member of staff and created a fantastic learning environment. We're only able to do that because rather than it taking 20 minutes to log on to those machines, it takes seconds. And they access you know, a Windows 10 environment, which is, you know, it might sound quite simple things, but we were, well, God knows what Windows system we were running before, but it just didn't work. So I have students that can go in there and they can log on, and they instantly can access their work. And increasingly now moved away from, well, not moved away, but complemented Century with the team stuff. So all staff are creating teams and sharing work, and they can go in there and continue. And that's been a big bonus to us during lockdown. I think one of the things that we did when we went into lockdown, we didn't have teams. We had 3 people, including myself, who kind of understood it and knew how to do it, and were using it a little bit. We developed that understanding rapidly, as all schools did with their remote learning. But the difficulty was training staff remotely, and even more training students remotely. So the first thing that we did at the start of this term was every class went into that Strive room and a couple of our other IT rooms, and we taught them, made sure they understood the basics. And we also have an enterprise area of school, and they do all their delivery through Teams. So on a weekly basis, our students are being upskilled, and all of that is down to the confidence of staff to take them into IT rooms. And I'm now in a situation where we will look to implement a one-to-one solution, knowing that the infrastructure and the Wi-Fi and everything is up to is able to cope with that. So I think it's just accelerated our IT just at a time when it really needed to be accelerated. And I think one of the things that's a benefit for us is that the resolution of IT issues aren't dependent on the particular skill set or knowledge of one IT technician. You've got this pool of people, so all help desk tickets go centrally, you know, and different people with different areas of expertise pick those up and then eventually escalate through to Dave with particular issues. And I think one of the things, and it is picked up as a question for us, is the governance side of this. And I think that's critical, really. I think somebody asked a question about purchasing decisions, because we've certainly been in a position where, you know, people randomly going off and buying things, whereas now the processes are in place, so that doesn't happen, and we can actually have a strategy for IT development across the trust, which will be discussed increasingly at a governance level. And that came from talking to a local successful academy chain who had that in place. But that's critical to this.
Sorry, Adam, also add, it also came from another reference site, which was a university in the southeast who had gone through this process, but they said one of their learnings was not having a governance process within the organization. And they felt they didn't get the full benefits of the solution because there wasn't a defined governance and sign off of IT spend within the organization. So again, that is definitely something we're working on. And to the question someone's asked, yeah, we've had resistance from one particular school, but the vast majority loved the train tracks and trains analogy Adam referred to, and are on board with that and understand exactly what it is we're trying to do. Most head teachers are, right guys, can you just solve this for us? Can you get this working for us? I just want to be able to run anything on those train tracks, Dave, so please just get them going. And that's what we've done. You know, try and make it as agnostic as possible to not, you know, stifle creativity within schools, not stifle innovation, but try and make it as agnostic as possible to run and develop and try things out. And so it's getting that right balance, but to have a governance arrangement in place, you know, helps keep a track on that across the organization.
So following on from that, obviously a significant reduction in operational expenditure and maintenance and management work time was expected. Were these savings as simplicity? Will these savings and simplicity factor in your decision, would you say?
So I think I've answered this before with a number of people, and I think we've already referenced the major issues that we had across the 13 schools with their poorly invested in infrastructure and networks. Very early on, back in 2018, one of the first pieces of work I did with David Burns when I started with Red Kite Learning Trust was an audit of all the schools. And we identified that over a 5-year period, just to stand still, literally just to replace and upgrade that infrastructure, we would need to spend £1.25 million on wired and wireless infrastructure. And back, it was probably in the end of 2018 when we put this initial vision together for transforming education within Red Kite through ICT investment. We said, why not spend that in a different way? And that's where we put the idea to them around a single centralized network. We would need, though, that £1.25 million, but we'd spend it in a different way with the added benefits as everything that Adam's talked about already in terms of teaching the learning benefit and collaboration and cooperation across the schools. So I was lucky in a way in that I said that, you know, we need to spend this money, we want to spend it this way, and we believe there will be significant benefits. What that translates to in terms of savings, I was honest and said we've underinvested. If we are going to make this, and one of the questions was how much have we spent on this solution? Well, we went to the board in March March the 26th this year, just as schools were closing down, which was quite an interesting time to put a proposition to the board about spending £1 million to deliver this summer in the middle of a global pandemic. But we decided to do it. You know, I think we've been really pleased with the outcome of that. But to go for £1 million investment, and that's not all hardware, that is hardware, professional services, plus that investment in additional IT resource for Red Kite to deliver this program over a 2-year period. Because whilst we went live in the summer, we've migrated 5 schools this in the summer holidays, another 2 in October half term. The rest of the schools will migrate through this academic year, and by the end of next August they'll all be on there. We will then look to see just exactly where we can get those synergy benefits and those efficiencies, and get much better visibility of the costs of the solution and the costs to schools of the use of IT across all 13 schools. So in some ways, and I've talked to Brian Horsburgh about this in the past, I was just open and honest with the board. I said, we've underinvested. We need to make the best of this, give an equality of provision for students across all of our schools, and we need to invest in that. And they bought into it, which was really good. I'm really pleased to see. So to the question, it's been £1 million over 2 years in terms of delivering this single infrastructure. That is just around the hardware infrastructure, okay? It's not about devices in schools, that's school-based. To get that infrastructure, though, we don't get capital from the department, as many of the education providers will know, for ICT. We're expected to find that from school budgets. So again, very early on, what I proposed to schools, because we'd grown into such a size, we were getting a lump of capital every year from the department for buildings. So I could get new windows, I could get a new roof on a school. I couldn't get new servers with that money. I'm not allowed to. So we agreed to pool some money every year from the schools, and that, along with the little extras money we got from Philip Hammond back in 2000 and whenever, 17, 18, we kept that and put that as a major contribution to the capital pot of money that Dave Burns has been able to spend this year. So that's just a bit of background around the financial side of that.
Okay.
Just Terry, just from a personal point of view, I mentioned our Strive room, which is intrinsically linked with this. In year last, we saved £50,000 on supply costs by being able to use that facility. So it certainly helped at a school level.
Mm. Yeah, interesting. I suppose this last question goes to everyone, really. Do you have any final comments or suggestions for anyone else about to embark on the same journey? Yeah. So
the highlights and obstacles bit, Terry, but I think it's linked into that really. For me, okay. One of the highlights, and I'm going to put this one up, guys. One of the highlights for me right back in May time was we're in the middle of closing schools down and struggling with the pandemic. And Terry sent me this lovely photograph saying, I told you, Dave, that the servers would come by Chinook. And if you look very carefully, you'll see Terry Guy walking on the side of the Chinook helicopter there, which I completely believed. Turned out to be a complete wind-up, which really made me laugh at the time when things were pretty stressful in terms of dealing with COVID. So that was great. In terms of highlight for me was, and learning point was, get a great partner, which we have done, and they've really supported and delivered that solution in the summer for us. Challenges was making sure that you've got enough, not overcommitting the number of schools you're going to transfer in one time, and if you are, make sure you've got the right number of IT technicians and resource. That was a challenge for us, I'll be honest. We did get all the schools, the 5 schools this summer who migrated over live within the first 2 weeks. Pretty much by the end of the first week, they were all working, all had access to resources, all on the internet working okay. But we probably over-committed and didn't have sufficient resource this summer to do that internally, I mean, ourselves. But that was it. So be prepared. Someone from one of the reference sites said, if you're going to do this, make sure you've got broad shoulders. Well, we certainly do now after that, because it was a pretty stressful couple of weeks, but we got through it. And the other key kind of feedback was make sure that you've got a fully joined up plan, and you've got all important partners linked into there. I think because we'd not done this before, we didn't really spend enough time considering the impact, say, on our internet service provider and the need for them to be joined in with Nviron early days. And the Microsoft 365 work we probably left too late in the day, and you know that again was pretty stressful through the summer getting that migration plan in place. So kind of a visibility of that earlier on from my own personal point of view, I think would have made it less stressful, but we got there and it's working and everybody's happy with the solution. That's my kind of feedback. I don't know about Adam and Dave.
Yeah, I think Dave mentioned our trips down to Beck. And I think the very first trip we did with both Dave and David, we worked on our vision for IT, and those principles that started there and were developed across the next year, we've stuck to. So at each point, whether it's been with the MIS and the shift to Arbo, or whether it's been this infrastructure or teaching and learning, it goes back to those principles. And I feel quite confident that the decisions we've made have stuck to those and are meeting those objectives. I think the other thing, you know, people have mentioned about how to get this through with, you know, resistance from people. Well, I think we'd learned, because, you know, in terms of changing an MIS, if there's anything that's going to meet resistance to change, changing an MIS is probably one of the biggest ones. So we learned a lot from that in terms of that movement. But I think one of the issues we had was we were trying to do this and we were trying to consult when everybody's attention was not on this. It was on COVID and school reopening. So one of the things was, as Dave mentioned, the 365, the SharePoint and the tenancy and the conversations. That was one of the things that we had to pick up later, purely because we just didn't have the time to work through that solution at the level and the depth. And it was through Guy working with Nviron that we were having those conversations during the summer and putting that together. And ideally that would have been earlier, and that would have helped with our initial sort of adoption in September.
Anything from you, David?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that was one of the key things from me, really. I think, as Adam's just mentioned, it's about this can't really be seen as a technology project. You know, and technology has to be involved in it, and the IT staff have to be involved in it, but the schools and the trust itself need to be involved as well. So it's all about consulting regularly with the schools, keeping them informed as what's going on, but also as well just making sure that they're aware of how things are going to change and what is going to be changing as well, and just providing that information to them ahead of time so you can have those sorts of conversations with them. You know, there's, as has been mentioned, you know, I don't think we could have chosen a worse time to be doing this sort of project, really. You know, we'd had a lot of, before we actually placed the order, as Dave said, and got final approval for it, we've been working on this proposal really for a considerable amount of time, certainly at least, you know, 13 months in anger, just pulling stuff together for it and planning it all out. So we had a great project plan, which just all went pretty much out the window when all the schools were shut and we couldn't get into each site, and couldn't talk to staff, couldn't go into staff and show them how to do, you know, how they would do all the bits and pieces which would make our lives easier. So it's just being aware, really about the key things that you need to do within each school. You know, getting a list of, and we've got a good workflow now in terms of some of the questions that we ask and the things that we need to look at and consider when we're moving. But doing that, looking at the level of detail about where people are storing files, who's going to be accessing them, when they need access to them, and how long they need access to them for. And I could talk for rather a long time about some of the bits and pieces we've done around that, but I don't think we've got time for that. But
no,
you know,
that's great. Thank you very much. I know there's quite a few questions coming, so people willing to stay a little bit later, and we'll cover those off after we've just got a couple of speakers. I think it is. We'll cover those off at the end, and if we don't get around to your specific question, we'll definitely get back in touch and provide a response by phone or by email. But I'd like to thank the panel for their time and a very interesting and informative session. I enjoyed it thoroughly. We'll be back to you later, but now it's over to Brian.
Like, I'll keep this short and sweet, because by looking at the time, it's we're truly ticking off. I had a few points I wanted to make, but I think the team have actually covered the majority off as we've went through. I mean, we've consistently heard the need for change, that journey to begin, and looking right across and dealing with a number of multi-academy trusts across the UK. The word journey, everyone's at a different stage of that journey, but I think that one thing that COVID has really kind of brought it down from the start, that you need to be in a really good place. You need to be prepared to make those changes. That digital journey across all of the schools and all of the multi-academy trusts, it's really only just beginning. And maybe just go off tangent slightly, I had a really good conversation with some of the universities over the last couple of weeks, who are talking about how they can get the future courses that aren't in university population at the moment and ready for them, but how they can make sure that they're working with schools and trusts to make sure that the digital curriculum journey is ready as well for those kids coming through, for those next generation digital jobs. And so this is just beginning, and it's like, to be in the best place you possibly can be. We need to help support that multi-academy trust journey, and it goes. Dave uses track and train. We utilise a little bit of a different methodology, which is just around about modernising the infrastructure, and it doesn't need to be physical infrastructure. It can be around about the hybrid aspect to get the best value out of all of this. The tasks and a lot of the IT tasks need to be automated. When you do the modernisation and the automation, then you start to transform the organisation, not just for today, but so that you can make it easier as and when things do change. New schools come in, schools leave the multi-academy trust, things are going to kind of happen. It's making sure that it's simplistic in its approach so that you can evolve. And I think the big thing that, David, if I can ask you one question, is just, you mentioned the role about the trainer that you've added to the staff. Can you elaborate just a little bit? Just sorry, I'm being really nosy now, but can you elaborate a little bit more around about what that role is and the purpose of that role?
Go on, Dave, you answer that.
Okay, no problem. Too many Daves. So so I think really, and this turned out to be one of the key decisions, was I wanted to get a trainer involved just to basically be somebody who is not necessarily heavily technical, but who can basically reduce the amount of initial support calls that the technical team get, because there is going to be a lot of them, but who can go in there, speak to the office managers, who can speak to the teaching staff, and just help provide, a basic understanding about, right, this is your new system, this is what it looks like, this is where everything is, this is how you access this is how you can get onto your old server to access things, this is now Microsoft Teams, this is where stuff is, and just provide an overview about some of the new features. It doesn't need to be in a massive amount of detail, but the trainer we've got, Jess, has been amazing. She's created a bunch of guides which we can use just to give out to the schools, so they're there. So the teachers have got access to them from day one or even beforehand, so that they know what everything looks like, how everything's going to behave when they first start to log on. It can talk them through, some of the basic questions they've got. And again, that just reduces the amount of support calls that we get, reduces the demand on all the staff, and also reduces the frustration as well that's being felt within schools. So it's helped enormously.
Can I just add, what was really great is in October half term, we migrated 2 primary schools over onto the network, a 1 form entry and a 2 form entry school. And Jess, again, worked heavily with those schools. That migration went brilliantly. Literally by Wednesday after half term, Dave and I were ringing in every day with the schools, how are things going? No issues, absolutely fine. Jess had been in, given those handouts. What was really nice is one of the head teachers said to me, "Can we keep Jess, please?" Which was great. I mean, it just shows, that's in terms of the value that adds to end users, and give them a really high quality experience by adopting a new set of procedures and systems and ways of working. It's really worth it. Really, man. That's part of that additional investment I'm going for with the board, and it's really paid dividends.
Just a fantastic example of innovation. It's brilliant. It really is really good to see. Really good to see. Sorry, Adam.
No, I'd just like to add in terms of Jeff. So initially, sort of pre-Jess, all of the sort of 365 and use of Teams, SharePoint was coming from me, and that was determined to have sort of consistency and centralized control in terms, so we wouldn't go off in millions of different directions and lose all the benefits of collaboration. And since Jess has been appointed, and me working with her and primary schools and secondary schools, I don't have to do it anymore. She just knows how things should be done. So in terms of consistency and, you know, training people, it just works, and it's taken huge amount away from me, and it's made it sustainable. So clearly, as a head teacher, I can't be doing that, but it's definitely a significant benefit.
Oh, brilliant. And lastly, just for myself, sorry, Gary, just before you, I know you're going to close off with Andy, but the guys kind of commented just around about the CapEx purchase, and a lot of it was driven by CapEx. You know, a lot of people make decisions based on moving much more to an operating expenditure and going down the multi-cloud route. Between ourselves and Nviron, the solution that has been put in place, we can offer both. So we can offer it as an operating expenditure and as a service, or as an initial output. So there are multiple options here, just in case people are looking at this and looking at the upfront cost. We can look at doing a bit of both, just to kind of cross that one off in case the question came up down the line. Gary, over to yourself.
Hello. Yes, Andy, are you still there? I've not seen his camera or his audio at the moment.
I am indeed, Gary. Yeah.
There we go. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Are there any final questions we want to cover off from the chat? I think we've pretty much
Andy, there's
covered.
a lot. Right? Andy, it's Dave. There's a lot of questions there around MIS, Arbor, Sims. If you know, if people want to talk to us around that as a separate piece, more than happy. You know, we've had a really great experience this year with that migration. So happy to follow that up with a separate session with people if needs be. Just get in touch.
No problem at all. Yeah, well, I'm sure people will take you up on that, Dave. So just for anyone who doesn't know, Arbor's a cloud-based software as a service delivered MIS platform. So you currently sort of move away from Sims and over to Arbor, or have you?
We've got 11 schools now on Arbor.
Right.
All primary schools are through school, and Adams secondary school. We've got 2 secondary schools which were due to move this year, but again, COVID impact, it's moved into next year. But you know, we're committed to do that and get all the schools on the same MIS. Just gives us so much greater visibility around data and key KPIs for the trust.
I think one of the questions was around resistance to change, which obviously with, I think you alluded to earlier with MIS, obviously it's something people don't want to let go of very quickly. How did you handle that?
Honestly, none at all. No resistance at all. As soon as they saw it, and as soon as they could see what the solution gave them, they were all on board. And in fact, we migrated 9 schools onto Arbor in February half term this year.
Wow.
Arbor supported that, but it all went really, really well.
Any regrets? Anyone missing Sims, or are they all happy now with the?
No. We I've said in one of the response to one of the questions, we trialed it as a secondary school for a year, and one of our primaries trialed it. And then made a decision as a trust. But I mean, I think an awful lot of it comes down to the product, and I'm not here to push, you know, cloud-based or MIS or Arbor. But a lot of it comes down to the product, and a lot of it comes down to their process. And like everything, it's about building relationships with the people that you are wanting to work with. So it was a long process. It was, you know, we had it for probably 8 months on a trial basis. Then we had it for a year in anger before we made the decision to go trust-wide. So I took that on as a risk to the school on the basis that it potentially wouldn't. When staff see it and what they can do compared to what they had before, that it just, you know, and again, it's that talk, tell them what's coming.
The communication with them. One
of the questions is around bandwidth. So to be honest, that was a major part of the whole strategy, vision and strategy. So back in 2018, as we started this journey, use that word again, one of the key things was to get all the schools onto the same internet service provider. And we started that and migrated first bunch of schools, I think Easter 2019. And the final school moved on to that, an MPLS 1 in February this year. So that supported both Arbor because we increased the bandwidth for the schools, and it also set the, if you like, the foundation for the single network that we've implemented this summer. So again, that was a key piece of work we had to do.
Sure.
Yeah.
I've got 3 questions from the panel there. Sorry, from the attendees that I've picked out. So when you migrated schools to a single tenancy, did you migrate existing content within Mail, SharePoint, OneDrive, etc.? And start.
There's an interesting answer behind this one.
So this is the whole issue really over the summer, and talking to people. Essentially, people don't know where their data is. And they've got so much of it that is being backed up and is probably duplicated. So we did a big, I think Nviron did a piece of work for us just going through our servers across the piece. But it became quite clear, and one of the bits that would have been done during that summer term was going and talking to staff, because I think Dave Noble's mantra is that you've got to tell them it's coming, and tell them again, and tell them again, and tell them again, because they're saving stuff to desktops on USB sticks. The big thing that we found, we did lift and shift stuff from servers into the cloud. We also moved people's individual OneDrives across. Certainly talking from the schools that I've worked with very closely, massive misunderstanding of OneDrive and SharePoint and where they were saving work to and how they were sharing that. So that was a key thing that we've had to go out and tell people again and again and again, you know, why you're using SharePoint, what is OneDrive, but that was a key sort of area for us, because ultimately we bought an amount of cloud storage. We haven't bought, we don't need all the MS stuff doesn't sit on our servers anymore. But equally, if we can get it up into 365, it needs to be up in 365, so we're not saving it in the server farms, and it's that sort of, it's a big conversation, especially when they have terabytes of data that they've probably never seen or even aware of.
Yeah, it's efficient use of the resources available to you, basically, isn't it? Putting things in the right area and ensuring they can gain access to it.
Okay.
Any more questions there, Terry?
Question from Richard. Did you have any Google schools that joined your trust? If so, presumably they migrated to Office 365. Did you migrate their data contained within Google Drive and Classroom?
So we had one school that was that used Google, but they weren't massive users, so all they were really using it was from a mail point of view. So we migrated their mail. There was a couple of people in there who used bits and pieces within Google Drive, so we migrated that. They weren't using Google Classroom at all. So that was a relatively easy.
Fairly easy.
But that was part of the decision to go 365 early on, really, as a trust.
Paul, do you sync OneDrive to local PC servers, or do you just access directly on the cloud?
We use the OneDrive Business Client, so that will let you do a local sync of files that are being accessed. So yes, we do use that, and that works very, very well. And it's something that I would strongly recommend that you consider using. From an email point of view, we have certain users that use Outlook, but we push teachers, students to use Outlook via the web, so they use the web-based version of Outlook. There's a question about the MPLS connections on the sites. I've just answered that, about 2 bits.
One last one then from the attendees is from Kalpesh. We are a mass but geographically spread, 7 London, 2 Leicester, 3 Southwest. How do you see such a model working for us? And at the moment, each school is a silo with its own. Do you use a single on-prem AD central domain, or is it all Azure AD provisioned? So first question is, will it work for Calpesh, do you think?
One for you, Dave, I think.
It burns, yeah.
Dave Burns. Technical question.
So, yes, in a word. I mean, it's, you know, technically there's no reason why this couldn't work with schools scattered anywhere and everywhere, really. I think the one thing that we've done as a trust, as has been mentioned previously, we've kept things fairly localized, mainly just so that we've got an ease of personnel moving around between sites. But you know, there's fundamentally, as long as you've got your support systems in place, as long as you've got your structures in place, and as long as you know how you're going to be sharing information, then yeah, there's no reason why this couldn't work, you know, with schools in the Shetlands and down in Cornwall and Hampshire.
I'm not so sure it is a technical question so much as a governance and a communication across the trust. So I'm pretty sure technically it can be done. I think it is about all those conversations about why you're doing it and educational reasons and making sure that all the schools, and obviously it's harder but at the moment we're doing everything by Teams and Zoom and you know, so
it's quite important as well just that everybody has a shared vision about what you want to do. I think that's probably one of the key things. If people have different understandings of what, you know, using Office 365 means, that's going to cause a problem. Particularly if you think it means that everybody stores all the information there, and people think, well, I'll just put bits and pieces up there, but I'll use everything else locally or store it down as my hard drive. Then you know that's where it becomes an issue. So it's important, you know, all the work Adam did and Dave did in terms of talking both to the executive board of the trust and to the head teachers. You know, that's been pretty key, really, just for making sure that everybody knew what sort of information we'd be looking to store, whereabouts we were looking to store it, and how people could be accessing it.
Excellent. So I think there's a few more questions coming, but yeah, we'll get back to them individually. I'm just conscious of the time. You know, we're already nearly 15 minutes over. So
yeah, so thank you, Terry. So and with that, we'll bring the event to a close. And gosh, sincere thanks to all our speakers who provided this fascinating insight into the Red Kite Learning Trust IT environment and the strategy and solution. And of course, thank you to everyone that attended. So have a great rest of your day. Thank you, and bye for now.
Yep, thanks all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. Thanks, Dave and Adam.
Andy.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Terry. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Brian.
See you later, folks.
Bye-bye.